Hello there and welcome to Thursday in Parliament. Coming up in the next half hour, the government sets out its Brexit policy paper. The Transport Secretary says expanding Heathrow will be good for Britain post-Brexit. And as MPs debate alcohol harm, a former minister talks about growing up as the son of an alcoholic.
I know what it's like to feel that cold nausea when you find the empty bottles hidden around the house.
But first, the government has published its 75-page Brexit policy document, laying out what its objectives are in the forthcoming negotiations on extracting the UK from the European Union. The principles were contained in the Prime Minister's keynote speech last month, so there were few surprises. The Secretary of State, David Davis, said it confirmed the Prime Minister's vision of an independent, truly global UK. The government recognised the need for clarity and certainty.
The White Paper also sets out that we will take control of our own laws, so they're made in London, Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and ensure that we can control the number of people coming to the UK from the European Union. And the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK will come to an end. It will be for Parliament and the devolved legislatures to determine significant changes to reflect our new position. I have said at this dispatch box before, there will be any number of votes on substantive policy choices. To that end, the White Paper makes clear that we expect to bring forward separate legislation in areas such as customs and immigration. Delivering a smooth, mutually beneficial exit, avoiding a disruptive cliff edge, will be the key. Whatever the outcome of our negotiations, we seek a more open, outward-looking, confident and fairer UK that works for everyone. The White Paper is available on the government website, and I've arranged for copies to be put in the library of both houses.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, normally I would thank the Secretary of State for early sight of his statement, but this statement says nothing. A week ago at Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister said there would be a White Paper. Yesterday she said there would be a White Paper tomorrow. The Secretary of State now makes a statement saying there will be a White Paper. But the White Paper has not been delivered until a few minutes ago, so that we can meaningfully actually ask him questions about it.
He repeated a demand for a vote in the Commons on the final deal between the PM and the EU.
Otherwise, all honourable members will have to watch on their screens as the European Parliament debates our deal before we get to express any views on it. That is completely unacceptable, and it's demeaning of this House.
There's no point in having a vote after he's already signed it off with the European Union, treating Parliament as some sort of afterthought. So can he rule out now the government showing such contempt for Parliament?
The point I made to him, I mean, this is now my sixth statement to this House in less than 6 months. And let me finish. The House will have the opportunity to vote on any number of pieces of legislation before we get there, and then it'll have the vote at the end to decide whether or not it's acceptable what it gets. I cannot see how you can make it more meaningful than that.
Now, Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State is more experienced than me, I'll concede that. But it's very striking that we get a White Paper after the second reading and 2 sitting days before the committee stage. Now, we've just got this before he got on his feet. Is that respectful to Parliament to be able to question him on it when it only goes out just as he goes on? I find that an astonishing disrespect for Parliament. Mr. Speaker, this is a mess. It's a bourrich, and it's going to have an impact on each and every one of us, and people deserve better.
On page 49 of this White Paper, the government says that, and I quote, "we have an open mind on how we implement new customs arrangements with the EU." Just for the avoidance of doubt, because I think it's important to be admirably clear so everybody knows where we stand, will the Secretary of State confirm today that we are not only leaving the EU and the single market, we are definitely leaving the customs union?
If he reads the rest of that chapter, he'll see we exclude ourselves from the common commercial policy and the common external tariff, which amounts to that, exactly what he said.
David Davis. A former Defence Minister has welcomed the decision of a disciplinary tribunal which has struck off a human rights lawyer who brought claims of murder and torture against British soldiers after the Iraq War. It found that Phil Shiner had acted dishonestly and upheld 12 charges of misconduct against him. He'd admitted acting without integrity at an earlier hearing. Phil Shiner, who founded the firm Public Interest Lawyers, was accused of drumming up false abuse claims and paying thousands of pounds to a fixer to find Iraqi clients. Speaking in the Commons during a debate on the armed forces, the MP for Aldershot and a former Defence Minister, Sir Gerald Howarth, gave this reaction.
I felt at the time that man, Phil Shiner, was a disgrace. He was a dreadful man, engaged in a cowardly and unacceptable activity of trying to find people who would stand up and accuse his fellow countrymen who'd gone to relieve the people of Iraq from their suffering. And he went to try and do down those people. I'm very pleased to hear today he's been struck off. Frankly, I don't think that's enough. But then I always was a supporter of capital punishment.
Our government is not doing enough. We need to do more to protect those who have done the most for us. Because what the Covenant should be about is to ensure that those who have served, who have risked all, who have given all, can come back safe in the knowledge that they are safe and that they are not going to be pursued by charlatans and liars like Philip Shiner, who has been struck off today by the Solicitors Regulatory Authority for his deceit, dishonesty and absolute treason to this country in the way he has pursued fine people.
If people like that had been around in the aftermath of the Second World War, and if our troops in the Second World War had known that they would have to face the duplicity and the manoeuvrings and the outrages perpetrated on subsequent generations of soldiers by people like that, then I do not think they could possibly have fought with the valour that they did in defeat of Nazism and fascism.
A third runway for Heathrow Airport was approved by the government in October, but we've still not had the very final decision. The next stage in the plan to actually build the runway is now underway. The Transport Secretary has launched a 4-month consultation and set out planning and infrastructure proposals. In the Commons, Mr Grayling, a staunch supporter of leaving the EU, couldn't resist making a connection with Brexit.
By backing the North West runway at Heathrow Airport and publishing our proposals today, we are sending a clear signal that when we leave the EU, Britain is open for business. So, Mr Speaker, today I lay before Parliament a draft Airports National Policy Statement and begin a period of extensive public consultation on the proposals it contains.
Labour focused on air quality.
There's an increasing concern regarding air quality, which is linked to 40,000 early deaths a year, and David Cameron's former aide, now Baroness Camilla Cavendish, claimed existing policy on air quality underwhelms and overclaims. Given this inadequacy, what further and stringent measures will be proposed to mitigate expected expansion at Heathrow?
But of course, some of the things we're consulting on today, Mr Speaker, for example, smarter use of airspace, one of the things we will be able to achieve through airspace reform and through the technology that's now available to us is to avoid, to anything like the degree we experience at the moment, planes stacking over the southeast of England, emitting additional emissions into the atmosphere, using up more fuel. That's one of the benefits that comes from smarter use of airspace that will help contribute, as will cleaner, newer generation, more fuel-efficient aircraft that we will see, I think, extensively in this country over the coming years.
The Secretary of State will be aware that on the 23rd of January we had a black alert in air pollution in London and 12 local authority areas signalled red alerts. That means toxic air and it's at crisis point in London. So I think if you're going to reassure the people of London to continue to support this decision, we need a much more comprehensive air pollution strategy, not the government's current plans that the courts have said are woefully inadequate.
Will he explain what he will do if the airport cannot be delivered within legal air obligation limits? Proceed anyway, change the air quality objectives, or pull the plug on the runway?
Well, Mr Speaker, it's very clear the airport will not be able to secure its development consent order if it cannot demonstrate its ability to meet those targets. It is binding, it will have to achieve those. But in terms of our broader strategy, after we have left the European Union, the air quality standards in place in this country will be UK air quality standards. But it is not the intention of the government to reduce air quality standards. It's our intention to deliver a strategy that cleans up our air, and that we will do shortly.
How can you consult on airspace strategy when you don't have a credible policy of how to address current noise pollution levels? How can you offer a consultation, national policy statement, when you have no credible or legal plan how to reduce air pollution? How can you have consultations ending on the 25th of May with no credible or legal plans of addressing critical noise and air pollution levels?
I know how strongly my honourable friend feels about this, and I know about the concerns in her constituency, and I very much respect her for what she's doing. This is one of the difficulties of a big strategic decision like this. It's impossible to take it without some impacts, and I give her simply my assurance that we will take all steps we can to minimise those impacts, inevitable though it is that there will be some.
This is going to be an investment of something not far off £20 billion, which is a great boost to post-Brexit Britain on top of the expansion at London City Airport. Can he give his best estimate as to when he believes the first plane will take off from the northwest runway?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I mean, both of us would share the aspiration to do this as soon as possible, but the working assumption is the first plane will take off in the middle of the next decade. Of course, we perhaps should have come to this decision a long time ago, but at the very least we are doing it now, and we'll get on with it as soon as possible. But we have to do it in the right way, we've got to do it in a sustainable way, and we've got to do it with great care for the surrounding communities.
Chris Grayling. The National Health Service in England is still failing to learn from its mistakes, MPs have heard. The Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee has published a report on how the NHS deals with complaints. It calls on the NHS to move from a culture of blame to a learning culture. The committee also urged the Department of Health to build up capacity for investigations.
The purpose of complaints is not just the redress of grievances, which I have to say in the NHS is extremely unsatisfactory anyway, although this is clearly important. Complaints are a tool by which public services can learn and improve. When medical professionals are forced primarily to be concerned with avoiding liability and responsibility and are trapped in a culture of blame, there can be no learning. There is an acute need for government to follow through on its commitment to promote a culture in which staff feel able to speak out and in which the emphasis is placed upon learning and not blame.
The committee also recommended legislation to ensure the new complaints body is truly independent.
It highlights some worrying statistics, including the fact that the most recent NHS staff survey found 43% of staff thought that their organisations treat staff involved in near-misses, errors and incidents fairly. And clearly, from the Chairman's candid contribution this morning, there is a long way to go before we eradicate the culture of defensiveness that he has described.
The Minister said the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch, or HSIB, would be up and running in April.
The Honourable Gentleman's Committee has again called for HSIB to be statutorily independent, and we agree that HSIB should be as independent as possible if it's to discharge its functions fully and effectively, and we would not rule out the option of legislation. His committees also raised, in this week's reports, various suggestions for HSIB and its potential role in setting standards, and we'll be responding to that formally in due course. We're committed to ensuring the NHS becomes an organisation that learns from its mistakes.
You're watching Thursday in Parliament with me, Alicia McCarthy. The government's been told to rethink its alcohol strategy and bring in a minimum unit price for alcohol in England and Wales. The call came from across the chamber as MPs debated ways to tackle the harm caused by drinking. One MP focused on the damage done when pregnant women drank, revealing his own adopted children were both affected by a condition called fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. The debate was opened by the chair of the all-party group on alcohol harm.
There are currently over 10 million people drinking at levels which increase their risk of health harm. Among those aged 15 to 49 in England, alcohol is now the leading risk factor for ill health, early mortality and disability. In England, the average age at death of those dying from an alcohol-specific cause is 54.3 years. More working years of life are lost in England as a result of alcohol-related deaths than from cancers of, and there are many of these, the lung, bronchus, trachea, colon, rectum, brain, pancreas, skin, ovary, kidney, stomach, bladder and prostate combined.
But she argued the government had done little since the last alcohol strategy in 2012.
In the forward to the 2012 strategy, the then Prime Minister said, "We can't go on like this. We are going to set a minimum unit price." But 5 years on, this has still not been done.
Two MPs turned to the impact of drinking during pregnancy, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or FASD.
FASD also causes learning difficulties, behavioural problems, and a high proportion of people convicted of crimes and are in our prisons are the victims of FASD. Research by the Medical Research Council has concluded that even moderate drinking in pregnancy has an impact on IQ and learning abilities.
If we all knew that 35,000 children were born every year in this country with brain damage that could be prevented completely, we would, of course, do everything in our power to prevent it. And yet, worrying evidence is emerging that may be what is happening in this country every year, and that the figures may be going up. As an adopted parent, I discovered just how common this is amongst children who are adopted, including amongst my own two children, and I should declare that interest. I first became aware of this. Yes, of course.
I don't know if he can recall when we were receiving evidence in our all-party group about the impact of fetal alcohol syndrome on adopted and foster children, that one survey done indicated that of the cohort of adopted and foster children who were assessed, up to 70% of them were affected by this syndrome.
There is now a suggestion that many children put up for adoption are damaged in this way, and we heard a description from one adoptive parent that adoption is now a family finding service for children with fetal alcohol spectrum disorders.
An SNP MP moved on to the scale of the problem in Scotland.
I have a very personal stake in this debate. By all accounts, my own father, of whom I have no memory, was an extremely heavy drinker. Was he an alcoholic? Probably, but that wasn't readily talked about in 1960s working class Glasgow communities. I didn't witness his heavy drinking because he died when I was 9 months old, not least because of his heavy drinking. My own husband's father was an alcoholic as well, and that also led to his early death. In Glasgow, where both my husband and I grew up, this was not unusual, and even today, it is still more common than you would think.
The Scottish Government has lowered the drink drive limit and is trying to bring in a minimum unit price.
What else could kill 22 people in Scotland each week, cause 670 hospital admissions each week, cost £3.6 billion each year, and not require bold action?
A Labour MP and former minister had spoken previously about growing up with an alcoholic father.
For much of my life, I've grown up with that gnawing insecurity that is all too common to many children of alcoholics. That constant feeling of guilt, constantly asking yourself whether you are doing enough. Why is it that you can't do more to stop your mum or your dad from drinking? I know what it's like to feel that cold nausea when you find the empty bottles hidden around the house. I know what it's like to feel sick when you hear your parent being sick first thing in the morning because they've drunk too much.
He said the children of alcoholics often fell through the gaps in provision. The Shadow Health Minister said his alcoholic father had moved to Thailand and not come home for his wedding.
His friends that he'd made over there told me he was drinking a bottle of whiskey a day over there. They told me he couldn't come to the wedding because he didn't want to embarrass me. Because we were from a working class family in Salford. I'd gone to university, I'd become a politician. Posh people would be at the wedding. He felt he would embarrass me by being there. And I'll always regret that. So, look, I'm the Shadow Health Secretary. I'm going to do lots of criticising the Tories because that's my job. But can I say to the Minister, I will work with government to put in place a proper strategy for supporting children of alcoholics on a cross-party basis, because, quite simply, 2 million children are suffering. Let's send them a message that they should no longer suffer in silence.
The Minister said there were grounds for optimism.
People under 18 are drinking less, and attitudes are beginning to change, and there has been a steady reduction in alcohol-related road traffic accidents. We've also seen some real progress in government working in partnership with industry. Industry removed 1.3 billion units of alcohol from the market through improving consumer choice of lower alcohol products, and nearly 80% of bottles and cans now display unit content and pregnancy warnings on their labels.
As to minimum pricing,
we are considering introduction of minimum unit pricing in England and Wales, but we are waiting for the outcome of the court case in Scotland, because until we hear the result of the Supreme Court decision, which the date for which is still unknown, and we are supporting the process of that case, we cannot proceed with any policy decision in the United Kingdom.
And she had an emotional moment at the end of her speech.
But I do take courage from today's debate, because great social change requires three things, I think. It requires long-term political will, it requires non-partisan partnership, and it requires bravery. And I've heard all three of those today. And I hope that each member who has spoken here today will continue to work with me as we fight on to tackle this social injustice. Thank you.
The Health Minister, Nicola Blackwood. Now the government's being urged to do more to secure the release of a British Iranian woman being held in Iran. A court there has rejected an appeal against a 5-year prison sentence given to Nazanin Zaharie-Ratcliffe, who has dual British and Iranian citizenship. The charity worker has been accused of security offences and was detained while trying to leave the country with her baby daughter after visiting relatives in April. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, who's from London, said his wife's detention was a stain on Iran, and her family denies she's broken any laws. Mr Ratcliffe was in the Lord's Gallery as the Foreign Office Minister explained what the government was doing to help.
FCO officials are in regular contact with Mrs Zaharie-Ratcliffe's family, and we continue to do everything we can for the family.
My Lords, I thank the noble lady. Unlike Mr Trump, we seek improved relations with Iran. But here we have a young mother, a British Iranian citizen, imprisoned after visiting her family there with her daughter. And her daughter is solely a British citizen. Surely the time has come for the UK to call for Mrs Zaharie-Ratcliffe's release before she, her little daughter and her husband, here today with his own mother, suffer further.
My Lords, the suffering of the family can barely be imagined, and we should, throughout all this, regardless of some of the extraordinary claims made on the internet, we should remember that this is a loving father who simply wants his family to be reunited, and I wholly respect that. That's why, my Lords, we are urgently seeking information on what further legal avenues are available to Mrs Zaharie-Ratcliffe, and undertake the FCO will continue to offer support to the family, both here in London and Tehran.
May I draw first the House's attention to my entry into the Register of Members' Interests as Chairman of the British Iranian Chamber of Commerce and also the government's trade envoy to Iran. Is the Minister aware that I have raised this issue myself with the Iranian government, and I associate myself wholly with the question that has been asked? Has the Minister noticed the statement by the President of Iran, the moderate President Rouhani, who has said that if Iran is to attract more investment and more commercial engagement with the wider world, it needs to make people who visit Iran both welcome and safe?
Does the noble Baroness understand the disappointment felt by those who supported the nuclear agreement and who have welcomed the improving relations between Iran and the United Kingdom? Would it not be unfortunate, to say the least, if the fact that this matter is not resolved should sully or undermine that emerging and improving relationship.
The child, I understand, is entirely a British subject. What is the government doing about a British subject being held in Iran?
My Lords, we've made it clear, I at this dispatch box, but also colleagues in another place, have made it clear that we stand ready to facilitate the return of Gabriella to this country. She is indeed solely a British citizen, and we stand ready to assist if the family asks us to do so.
And that's it from me for now. But do join me on Friday night at 11 for a roundup of a busy week here at Westminster that's been dominated by Brexit and the UK's relationships with the US. But for now, from me, Alicia McCarthy, goodbye.